Anything Ghost, episode number 313. Welcome to Anything Ghost. My name is Lex Wall. Anything Ghost, where you send in your personal ghost stories or local ghost legends, and I share them with the listeners. If you have a story to share, send it to lex@anythingghost.com. I have a lot of great stories coming your way in episode number 313, so stick around. Okay, this first story comes to us from Becca in Massachusetts. Haunting in Massachusetts. From 2006 to 2012, my ex-husband Jay and I owned a condo located in a relatively old city in Massachusetts. It was situated only a quarter mile from a still-in-use railroad that was built in the early 1900s. We had many paranormal experiences there, most of which were malevolent in nature. I will share with you a short history of some of the most memorable events that played out over the 6-year period that we lived there. When I first started dating Jay in May of 2006, Jay had already owned the 3-story condominium. He had just gone through a nasty divorce and had a roommate and a coworker named Hal who lived in the finished basement. I must admit, the first time I was given a tour, I had an extremely visceral reaction to the atmosphere in the basement. I refused to go into the cold room that had both internal and external doors. It felt oppressive and heavy, unsettling. I've always been what most refer to as a sensitive, and I've had many experiences throughout my life. So, feeling silly, I tried to brush it off and chalk it up to new relationship jitters. Over the first month or so that we dated, whenever I would stay over, I would bring a small overnight bag. Upon my arrival, I would typically lay out my toiletries and arrange my clothing for either after my shower that evening or for work the next day. When I would re-enter the bedroom in search of said items, more than often, they would be missing. Not moved or positioned differently, but gone. Pajama pants, sweatshirts, my toothbrush, jewelry, makeup, etc. just vanished into thin air. Frustrated, I would usually make do with whatever else I had and move on. The next morning, or even sometimes several days later, my missing items would reappear out of nowhere, and they would be exactly where I had left them before. On more than one occasion, I received a text message while at work or at home with a photo of whatever had shown up. For a brief period of time, I wondered whether or not my new boyfriend was playing tricks on me, but he genuinely also seemed bewildered. Eventually, things stopped disappearing, and I let it go. Fast forward a couple of months, and I moved in while simultaneously Hal was moving out. The poor guy had gone through a terrible breakup with his pregnant fiancée. He was a wreck. He'd lost weight, was completely emotionally destroyed, and had basically been secluding himself down in the basement, barely showing up to work, not paying rent consistently, and having lost all sense of his once endearing and jovial personality. Jay had told him it was time to move out. We passed often during those weeks, shimmying sideways by one another, arms loaded with books, boxes of vinyl albums, clothing, and knickknacks. One loading a truck and one unloading. Each time I saw him, he silently greeted me with tired, sunken eyes, framed in dark, ominous circles. I quietly wondered if when I'd first arrived, the basement had been reflecting his energy, or if that energy was what had eaten his. It was a warm and bright day in July, when we were putting the finishing touches on our merge together as a couple in the space. The washer and dryer were in the corner furthest from the stairs in the basement, and I'd been washing linens to make a fresh bed for the evening. It had been a long week. I had started a new job, and between moving and training, I was exhausted. Standing with my back to the rest of the room, transferring the laundry from the washer to the dryer, and completely lost in my thoughts, I was stopped dead in my tracks by a small burst of air, ice cold and blown directly in my ear. It wasn't silent. It was something barely above a whisper and wordless, but audible nonetheless. I froze, hunched over in front of the dryer and completely unsure if I'd actually experienced that. Clutching the comforter with my white knuckles, I whirled around quickly, eyes scanning the rest of the well-lit room for any movement. Nothing. Realizing I had been holding my breath, I sucked in a gasp of air. Quickly stuffing the comforter in the dryer, I slammed the door shut, raced up the stairs to the safety of the living room. For multiple years, we had recurring instances of noises, finger and handprints left in random places, like at the very top corner of the mirrors in the bathroom, practically out of anyone's reach. More randomly disappearing and reappearing items, and a couple of truly frightening happenings. By this time, we were married and had acquired cats. The cats made it somewhat easier to point the finger when something went bump in the night. I remember many nights I would be startled awake somewhere around 3 a.m., hearing noises all over the house. Shutting my eyes and rolling over, I'd often tell myself, "It's just one of the cats." Countless times I'd hear something so loud that I'd be forced to get up and search the house. I'd then find the TV downstairs, volume up, with the remote sitting on the coffee table untouched, and the channel having been switched to something that neither of us ever watched. Many evenings I would be comfortably parked on our couch watching television and waiting for my then husband to come home from work. Being a restaurant manager, he would often not arrive home until well after midnight or 1 in the morning. As I didn't like to go to sleep alone in the house, I often waited for him while basking in the safety of the glow from the TV screen. Our front door had an external screen door that had to be opened before you could enter the home. I lost count of how many nights I had heard that screen door click open, mimicking the sound of someone entering the mudroom. I would jump up in an excited attempt to greet my husband, who was never there. No one ever was. One afternoon, as we said goodbye to one another at the door, as he left for work, I closed the door behind him. No more than 2 seconds later, a very loud crash came from somewhere upstairs, shattering the peaceful afternoon silence. Nervously, I slowly ascended the stairs to the 3rd floor, poking my head into each bedroom, searching for what could have easily been something knocked over by the cats. I found nothing in any bedroom nor hallway, and I made my way into the bathroom to investigate. Finding nothing on the floor or countertops, I pulled back the shower curtain, only to be greeted by every single shampoo bottle, shower accessory, and bar of soap standing up, huddled together in the center of the bathtub. I quickly decided I was not going to be touching any of it. Hastily, I closed the shower curtain and vacated the bathroom, closing the door behind me. Hours later, upon my husband's arrival home, when I brought him up to the bathroom to show him, everything was neatly back in its place, as if it had never been disturbed. There were 2 different occasions during the time we lived there that I saw who I referred to as the sad woman in white. Both instances found me nonchalantly passing through my living room or dining room with a sudden urge to raise my head and look through the sliding glass doors that led out to the small back porch. She would be standing there, hovering just a few inches above the deck, mostly transparent, but with a definite outline. She was young, with long dark hair that fell in waves to her shoulders and tied off to one side with a ribbon. Her cheeks were sunken in, her eyes empty and sad. She wore a white dress, simple in design. Her feet were bare. Both times I saw her, I became completely enveloped in a bone-deep sadness that did not belong to me. It was as if the lens through which I viewed the world had been switched out for someone else's and tinted with an unbearable sorrow. It was fleeting, and within moments she would slowly fade away, completely disappearing from sight, taking with her the incredible grief that I had drenched in only moments before. Each time she left me reeling, wondering who she was, why she was so forlorn, and if there was something I could have done to help her. There was only one instance in which I was touched by whatever was living with us in that house. It was a late night, me once again finding myself fighting heavy eyelids in an attempt to see my husband home before falling asleep. I sat on the couch, leaning forward with my elbows on my knees, attentively watching whatever was on the screen, while my hands dangled freely between my legs. I half realized that one of my elbows was sliding off my knee. Snapping to attention, I focused my tired eyes on my hand and realized further I was being pulled toward the coffee table. My arm bent at a downward angle. The sensation of cold fingers wrapped around my wrist suddenly registered in my sleepy, desperate brain, and immediately every fiber of my being jolted to life. I yanked my arm back, cradling one hand in the other, pulled against my chest in terror. I leapt outwards and then backwards, finding myself huddled up on top of the couch against the wall, a feeble attempt to put as much distance as possible between myself and whatever had just tried to drag my arm underneath the coffee table. I panicked. Diving for my cell phone on the other side of the couch, I dialed my husband as I ran out the front door. Frantically, I attempted to explain what had just happened to Jay, who was on the other side of the line and begging me to slow down. Unable to decipher anything through my hysterical sobs, I stayed outside in my car waiting for him to finish work. I sat in that car that night, looking up into our bedroom window and watching the lights turn on and off for hours until he got home. The last experience I'll share with you scared me half to death and started the process of us searching for a new home. The summer of 2011, I experienced the physical manifestation of the evil that lurked within our home. I sat on our small back deck, lazily reclined in an Adirondack chair one hot and sunny July afternoon. Gazing into the gardens of the backyard, I sipped my coffee and let out a relaxed sigh. I dropped my head back and closed my eyes, letting the sun heat up my cheeks and create little fireworks behind my eyelids. I smiled. The lively sounds of the birds at my feeder and the woodland creatures scampering about filled my ears. But suddenly, I became hyper-aware of a heavy presence coming from directly behind me. At that moment, a distinct cold breeze crept up and over my shoulders. My eyes snapped open, goosebumps racing to meet one another at the center of my spine, despite the steam of the summer heat. Sitting up straight, my back arched as all the hairs on my neck stood to attention, I gripped the arms of the chair, splinters from the weathered wood embedding themselves into my palms as my jaw tightened. The immense, heavy anger radiating off of it was overwhelming, and I trembled in terror as I realized that the breeze, the birds, the squirrels, everything around me had fallen silent. Every instinct screaming in my brain told me not to turn around, but against my better judgment, I rose slowly, gripping my coffee, and turned around to face whatever was behind me. The cold rush of air nearly knocked me backwards as I stood, meek and small in the shadows of an immense black creature. It loomed over me, totally opaque, equivalent to when people describe a shadow person being darker than the dark, except this was in broad daylight. It was not in the least bit impacted by the blinding sun, which had shone upon me only moments prior. The outline of the inky, bulky figure was towering over me. My fight-or-flight instincts failed me, all at once, leaving me to tremble, blankly staring in disbelief at what stood in front of me. No face to be seen, no eyes that met mine, nothing but thick, endless blackness met my gaze. I stood frozen to the spot, mouth agape, afraid that I would faint. And then, inside my head, a deep, gravelly voice churned out a single word: "Leave." I gasped, inhaling sharply and dropping my coffee, the ceramic mug shattering at my feet. Part of my mind registered the cold splatter of liquid along my lower legs. I closed my eyes and squeezed them tightly, breathing rapidly, stumbling backwards, finally moving. When I opened my eyes, it was gone. The birds singing, life springing back into motion, the sun still beating down. I looked around with worried eyes, my heart racing in the still of the afternoon. I left the house and stayed outside until later that evening, when my ex-husband had returned home. We moved the following year. And that was a great creepy story from Becca. And thinking back on it, I was kind of leaning toward what she said at the end, the black creature. She kind of said she was kind of dozing off in the chair, so it almost sounds like it might have been a form of sleep paralysis, because it kind of had all the notes to that song. But regardless, whether it is or whether it wasn't, a really great story, and thanks for sharing it with us, Becca. The next story is from Parker in Alabama, Bryce Asylum. I work at the University of Alabama. Our campus has many historic buildings, one of which is an antebellum Bryce Hospital, which was founded just before the Civil War and was originally a leader in the humane treatment of the mentally ill. It's a huge white building with a domed entrance at the center of 2 large hospital wings. All 3 floors are filled with windows. It's quaint, but if you saw it, you would immediately think it was an asylum of some kind. It had a great reputation for mental health care for its early decades, but over time, with budget cuts, it gradually became the worst kind of asylum. My mother was a social worker during this later era, and was sometimes required to check on patients in the asylum or even to bring people in for commitment. She can't bring herself to even look at the building because of the things she saw there. She saw people strapped to beds and checked on patients who were heavily sedated all the time. She said the most haunting thing she saw was an older woman talking to herself like a child and holding a mangled, armless baby doll. Over the last decade, the university bought the campus and renovated the old Bryce Hospital as a welcome center. I now work in the new Old Bryce. The original building was constructed by enslaved people and was later witness to thousands of people suffering in its time as a mental hospital. More than just a few of the women my mother saw were perfectly healthy, but they were an inconvenience to their families or husbands. Not surprisingly, the building has an aura of despair. Many of my coworkers report feeling watched in their offices, which were once patients' rooms. At sunset especially, human-shaped shadows fill the windows. I can feel them watching me as I leave in the evening. The beautiful manicured lawn was a place for patients to wander and get fresh air. I like to wander it as well, and sometimes hear soft footsteps behind me, or catch a glimpse of movement. Dr. Bryce and his wife are actually buried with ornate markers in the lawn. Maybe they wanted to keep an eye on the hospital and its wards even now. I hope they approve of the reconstruction. And I recommend doing a search for the Bryce Asylum. There's a lot of great paranormal stories associated with it. The Bryce Asylum in Alabama. Thank you, Parker. And here's a short story from Ben in the U.S. I thought my mom was home from work. I was about 6 years old at the time of this story. I was home with my dad. He had some food for us, and we were sitting talking for a while. It felt like a couple hours. At one point, he asked me to check what time it was. That way he could get an idea about where she was, how far she was from home. I told him the time, and we realized that she wasn't close to home yet. After what felt like an hour, my dad asked me to check the time again. We did that about 4 times. Suddenly, the doorknob turned, but the door didn't open. My dad saw it and heard it. He told me to help my mom open the door. So I peeked out the window of the door, which has big blinds that cover the window and reaches down to the bottom. And I turned with a serious, shocked face. I said, "Dad, nobody's there." My dad said, "Stop the nonsense and open the door for your mom." "Dad, nobody is there." My dad and I opened the door, and nobody was there. I peeked out in the garage, and nobody was there either. About 30 minutes passed before my mom actually got home. When she did, my dad asked her if she had tried to open the door earlier. She said she told us she had been on the road. Thank you for that story, Ben. And next up is a self-recorded story. This is from Jessica in Orlando, Florida. Grandpa is okay.
Hello, Lex and Anything Ghost listeners. My name is Jessica, and I'm from Orlando, Florida, and I have a story that I'd like to share quickly. It happened recently when my grandfather passed away. Let me just give you a little background first. Now, my grandparents have lived in the same house my entire life since my mom was in high school. In 2018, my grandmother passed away, and my mom decided to move in to my grandparents' house with my grandfather, to keep an eye on him and drive him to doctor's appointments. I mean, at this point, he was almost 90 years old, so she wanted to keep an eye on him. So she moved in with him, and my grandfather was in for his age and in great health, and even as recent as this past Christmas, he was eating Christmas dinner, exchanging Christmas presents, walking on his own. So that just shows you how quickly things can take a turn, because he passed away this past April after falling and breaking his hip. And so while he was still there mentally, still cracking jokes and his wit was still there, just his body wasn't cooperating any longer, and he passed away in his sleep on April 22nd of this year. And coincidentally, when my grandmother passed away in 2018, it was also on April 22nd. So I've had several experiences throughout the years, so I definitely believe in ghosts and the paranormal and life after death and the spirituality and things like that. So that kind of had some meaning for me. But that night that he passed away, my mom was in my grandparents' home, now her home, and she was talking about how she just hated that he was by himself and up at the funeral home, and she was just really worried about him. And well, so she went to sleep, and at 3 o'clock in the morning she was woken up by the house security alarm going off, loud siren blaring. She jumped up. The thing about this security alarm is it has not been in use, hooked up, since my grandmother passed away. So they've never set the alarm. After my mom moved in, there was no security alarm company. It's just the equipment was still there, and actually the siren or whatever that thing was housed in the back bedroom, in the closet, in this metal box next door to now my mom's room. So she woke up, this thing's going off. She jumps up and she races out of the bedroom, and all of the electricity in half of the house was completely off. Like there was no electricity, like the power was out. She goes out to the other side of the house where my grandfather's room was, and like the den and the kitchen, and that still had power. She peeked outside in the backyard, and the lights out there, like the motion lights and all that, those were all out as well. So this thing's going off. She can't get it to stop. So eventually she, in order to go back to sleep, and so she balled up a comforter and put it over the box just to deaden the noise so she could, try to get back to sleep. She eventually fell back to sleep, And when she woke up the next morning, everything was back to normal. There was no alarm going off. All the electricity was working properly in the whole house. And when she was telling me the story, I immediately said, "Oh, that's Grandpa. He's letting you know he's okay. You were all upset the night before about how you're worried if he's okay and if he's alone and he's, at the funeral home by himself. And that was his answer for you. He let you know and let us know that he's fine." Honestly, I took a lot of solace in that. That really helped get through his passing. We were very, very close. So, anyway, that's my story, and I hope you guys liked it. And keep up the good work, Lex. Love your podcast. I've been a fan, and I'm a VIP member for many, many years now. And I hope that you guys take care.
And thank you, Jessica. And as she mentioned in her recording, I have a VIP group. And if you want the complete archive of Anything Goes dating back to 2006, there's a lot of great stories in that archive, but you can get your hands on it by joining the Anything Goes VIP group. For more information and the one-time membership fee, go to anythinggoes.com, join VIP. And let's settle down now with the story from Poppy in Minnesota. Comfort from my friend after he passed. I've been listening to your podcast for years, and I've finally decided it's time to share my story. Years ago in high school, I worked at a big box store that sold home improvement, sporting goods, and farm supplies. It was a fun and easy after-school job where I got to socialize with colleagues and customers. I had a coworker I will call BJ. He would always answer my calls and would always be so kind and patient. Soon, we started taking breaks at the same time. It started as a coincidence, but I think quickly became intentional. We would sit at different tables and didn't really talk to each other, but we always happened to show up at the break room at the same time. One day, his M&Ms got stuck in the vending machine. Despite his best efforts, the candy would not budge. That's when I came to the rescue. I saved his M&Ms by getting my own. From that day on, we always sat at the same table. Those 15-minute breaks soon became the highlight of my day. I know it sounds cheesy, but I got lost in his eyes once. I remember sitting down, making eye contact, and the next thing I knew, our break was over. I had a crush on him, and I think BJ felt the same way. Unfortunately, we never got the chance to see where our relationship would go. BJ went home for spring break and was killed in an accident. I learned about his death when I went to work the following day. His funeral was out of state, and several of us made the 4-hour drive to pay our respects. Like BJ, his family was so kind. They gave us warm welcome and comfort, despite dealing with their own grief. I continued to struggle with his death. I just missed him so much. One night, probably about a week after his funeral, I had a dream about BJ. I still remember this dream clear as day more than 25 years later. In the dream, BJ and I were sitting on a dock, toes in the water. I remember kicking up my feet, sending drops of water into the air, and watching them catch the sunlight. Behind us, I could hear people laughing. BJ turned to me and said, "I'm okay." As soon as he said those words, a music box that I kept next to my bed started playing on its own at what sounded like full volume. It probably was so loud because I was completely disoriented after waking up from such a deep sleep. I immediately burst into tears because the song the music box played was "That's What Friends Are For." I know sometimes wind-up music boxes can play on their own if there's a mechanical issue, temperature, humidity changes, or if it was jostled. There has to be a logical reason, right? It was probably a coincidence. But in my heart of hearts, I believe BJ could sense how much I was hurting, so he decided to return the favor and rescue me this time. Those 2 words, "I'm okay," while simple, had a profound impact on me. The dream helped me overcome my sadness and heal my heart. Thank you for reading my story. As always, take care. And that was a story from Poppy in Minnesota. Thank you very much, Poppy, for sharing your story about BJ. And that'll do it for episode number 213 of Anything Ghost. Again, if you have a story you want to share, send it to lex@anythingghost.com. And don't forget, Halloween is just around the corner. So be sure to get some sort of story ready for Halloween. I mean, a true ghost story or a local ghost legend. Do a search around your town, see if there's any haunted libraries. Send that in to us and we'll get it on the Halloween show. Okay, so that's it. And I'm signing off. Have a great week and take care.